Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to this special Purim class. Tonight's class was dedicated in the schus of Chaya Sarah Malka, Bas Ruven Yehuda, whose yahrzeit, second yahrzeit was today, Sarah Goldberg, by her husband, Shmuley Goldberg. May her soul have a very, very, very great elevation to the greatest of heights. May she channel a lot of brachas down to her family, to her husband, and to her children, and to all those that were close to her. And may she evoke already the up there in heaven to awaken on the highest levels of where it needs to be awakened, that God should have mercy on Israel and on his children, and bring the Geula, bring us the redemption today. Okay, so we're standing now the week of Purim, and this week we read about the eradication of Amalek. This Shabbos, we start a new book of the Torah, Parsha Vayikra, which we will not be talking about today. We also have another special Torah reading about the eradication of Amalek, the forces of darkness in this world that fight both the Jewish people, they fight God, and they try to stop the redemption. All those forces are in full play right now in front of our eyes. The evil that we're watching and that we're seeing in the world, and the sympathizers for that evil, no matter how they camouflage themselves, we see and we know who they are and what they are. And things are becoming very clear in the world. And we know that we're standing at the very, very, very seconds before the redemption, the ultimate redemption, and the complete eradication of Amalek. So we need to really gear ourselves up for enormous miracles. Now this year, in particular, Purim has to be spectacular. It needs to be spectacular because there are 2 days in the Jewish calendar that are the headquarters of joy. There are the headquarters of Simcha. 2 days on the Jewish calendar. One is Sukkot, but it peaks on Simchat Torah, the joy of the Torah, which in Israel is celebrated as 1 day, the 8th day of Sukkot. And in the diaspora, it's celebrated as 2 days. The 8th day of Sukkot and the 9th day. Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah. That's the headquarters of joy. And the other time of the year in which we fill up on joy is the entire month of Adar, but it peaks on Purim. And this year we had 2 months of Adar and we had 2 Purims, but the primary Purim is the second Purim. So which is going to be this coming Sunday, where we're going to have our Purim, and Monday in Jerusalem and in the walled cities, as we discussed last time, the different times of reading the Megillah. A month ago we discussed it. Now, being that this year there was a great breach, and I use the word breach as we shall soon see in many levels, but there was a great breach in the joy of the Jewish people on Simchat Torah. On the 8th day, which fell out on October 7th, on that very, very difficult Shabbos, Saturday morning, when the darkest forces in the world attacked and perpetrated one of the worst atrocities ever that the Jewish people had experienced in the most heinous and despicable manner. And this was a knife thrust inside the heart of the Jewish people. And the news spread everywhere, although it was Shabbos, and although it was holiday, and we usually don't use our communication devices, whether it's radio, whether it's television, whether it's phones and emails or texts or messages in any other messages way. We don't utilize any of these, but news got around, filtered in from non-Jews, and it came across the entire world, and everybody knew about it. And as a result of that, it was very hard to rejoice. We kept the joy going because we know it's God's day of joy. We took out the Torahs, we danced, but we were crying and dancing at the same time. And it's hard to describe. It's hard to describe such a confused day like we had this past Simchas Torah. And being that the Jewish people without joy we're lifeless. We don't have the power to do what we need to do. And being that God needs Israel very, 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 very much, because we're his channel into this world. If God wants anything of this world, he needs to do it through the Jewish people. So if he dampened our joy on Simchas Torah, he needs to make up for it, and he definitely will make up for it on Purim. So this Purim has got to be the most joyous Purim ever. And on Purim it says, La Yehuda Moisa Oira v'Simcha. To the Jewish people there was light, there was Simcha, there was joy. There was joy when the first Purim happened. What is it, about 2,300 years ago or something like that? A little more, about 2,500 years ago. When the first Purim happened, with spectacular joy. And since then, we're very joyous every Purim. The joy of Purim is supposed to go beyond our mind to the point that we become intoxicated with joy. We transcend reason and normalcy to the point that we become crazy with joy. And this year, it's going to be on levels with God's help on ways that we can't even imagine. For that, we need some really, really, really big miracles from God's end. But let's see what we can do on our end. That's what the shir is dedicated to. What can we do on our end to prepare for those miracles and to help repair the breach of Simchas Torah? Now, it's very interesting because Simchas Torah wasn't only a breach of our holiday, it was a breach of the holiday. Physically, it was the breaching of walls that should not have been breached. Because on the literal sense, Israel, we would expect, has the best security system. You know, when you're being met by the agents of El Al, when you go to the airport, you know that they know what they're doing. You watch the other TSA people working over here. Whether they know what they're doing, or you don't know what they're doing, you don't really have a sense. You pray and hope to God that we will be safe. You should pray and hope to God even with El Al security. But you know that these girls and boys that are standing over there and stepping up to every passenger, they know immediately who's walking into the airport, and they know immediately, they size up everybody so well. They ask the questions, they know, right? They're trained, so they have an incredible nose to pick up even the slightest something. And in Israel, in the airports and everywhere, there's no monkey business. Israel has to protect itself ferociously because the amount of people that want to hurt her is the threat is always so big for the security of Israel. And for that reason, they have very, very great security. So you can imagine that the walls that separated and the security wall that was supposed to separate between Gaza and Israel was a very, very good security wall. And therefore, no one would have ever thought that that wall could be breached. And to imagine that I think a few thousand terrorists are able to come pouring over through a wall, which is supposed to be watched where hardly even one person can come through. And to watch so many just come pouring over without anybody stopping them, and then be able to move farther and for so many hours. This is an unforgivable breach. And obviously it was how Israel is going to deal with its own security issues. There's going to have to be a lot of answering by somebody to figure out how in the world that happened, but there's no question that this was a divine decree and that God orchestrated this for whatever reason. But there was a very big breach. That's the idea. There was a breach in the wall. And we know whenever there is a physical breach, it is connected to a spiritual breach. Because the physical is just a tangible, visible indication of the higher, deeper, invisible truths. So when we can't see sometimes, when we need to fix something in our ideology, when we need to fix something in our deeper, higher, and therefore undetectable dimension, God a lot of times shows it to us by something breaking down or going wrong in our physical bodies. And when you see it in your body, if you're wise, you don't just consult a physician. You don't just consult a dentist, doctor, whatever type of thing. You ask yourself, what is it that I need to fix in my inner being? And then it wouldn't be broken in the first place. What's the repair I need to do? We should always be doing repairs. And that is true individually and collectively. So collectively as a people, and Israel as a whole, when we watched and we saw such a breach, and such an impossible thing happen a couple of months ago, and we know that Purim is a time to kind of rectify, because we want God to rectify at His end what has happened. So we need to understand the breach. What was the breach? So we talk about actually breaching walls. Purim is very much connected to closing. Purim is very much connected to closing a breached wall. So literally what happened on Simchas Torah, that a wall was breached, Purim is very much connected to closing that breached wall. We discussed earlier in the year, right after October 7th, we spoke about that without a question, this atrocious act of Hamas has all the fingerprints of Amalek, the ultimate enemy and the final enemy of the Jewish people, which God is going to take down, which Hashem is going to eradicate completely. For Mashiach to come, this evil must be, this cancer must be eliminated thoroughly and completely. God is going to do it, but we showed all the fingerprints of that it's Amalek. Where did we see? So we discussed this, that it says that when the Jewish people, Vayishma Haknani Melech Arad, we spoke about this, that the Knani, the king of Arad, heard something and he attacked. That's what it says. And Vayesh Mimeni Shevi, remember we discussed this, he took captives. It's a verse in Numbers, Parshas Chukas. I don't remember which chapter, but in Numbers, Parshas Chukas, it discussed that the Knani heard, and the sages tell us, and Rashi brings us, what did he hear? He heard that Aaron, the high priest, passed away. And when he heard that Aaron, the high priest, passed away, and therefore what? The Jews were vulnerable. Why were they vulnerable? Because the clouds of glory that protected them were now gone. So he launched his attack since they did not have anymore this layer of protection. Because when the Jews were in the desert, they had man coming from heaven. That was their food. They had water coming from a rock. That was their drink. And they had protection coming from clouds. These were unpenetratable clouds. These were the highest security system possible. It was God Himself intercepting all hostile projectiles or whatever it is that was. See, this idea of shooting missiles and lobbying missiles into the Jewish camp is an age-old problem. It didn't start just recently. It didn't start in Gaza. It didn't start from Lebanon. It did not start with Hezbollah. It goes back. Pharaoh was doing the same thing. He was chasing the Jewish people and shooting at them projectiles. This goes back to the beginning of time. That's what is done. And God stands and protects. Hine layonim v'lo yishan. Today's days we have an iron dome, which is nice, but it's really God's protection. As we see that when God, for whatever reason, hides His protection, all the tricks in the world and all the protectors in the world don't help, like we all saw in this year's Simchas Torah. So when I pointed out a couple of months ago, something that is, I think, very, very clear, is that this attack happened on the day after we don't sit in the sukkah anymore. The sukkah that we sit is the clouds of glory. When did they attack? The day we are not sitting in the sukkah anymore. So being that we're not, meaning which means Aaron is gone. The clouds of glory of Aaron are gone. And that's when they attacked. Now, I said something harsh then, and it's particularly important because we're going to talk about that in today's class. This is going to be an important factor in today's class, is that one of the things that was going on, sadly, in Israel, in all through 2023, I would say not all through 2023, but from all through the late 22 and 23, was that there was a very, very terrible discord and inside fighting. So much so that it was showcased for the entire world that the Jews are fighting. The Jews are not getting along with each other. And there were day after day massive protests on the streets. Sadly, different political affiliations in Israel clashing with each other. Now, the enemies have clearly stated, when they interrogated the top Hamas people, or in documents that they found, or I'm not exactly sure what the source was, but it was clearly certified, that the reason they felt that they can attack, that Israel is vulnerable for attack, is because of all that fighting going on. They felt that Israel is very weak. And because when you're not unified, even just from a very, very simple level, when there are pilots that are threatening that if the government goes ahead and implements certain changes which they wanted to do based on their mandate, they were voted in with a certain agenda, and therefore they wanted to make certain adjustments and to Supreme Court's powers and so on and so forth. The people that were protesting against it. And they protested so much so that they said they're not showing up to duty. So once the military is threatening that because of political differences, people are not going to show up, someone is listening. Someone is paying attention and saying, well, listen, these people are not ready to fight when they can't get along with each other. And obviously the physical is reflecting the spiritual. The Jewish people have the most power in the world when they are unified, when they are together. And when there's, God forbid, a breach in the unity of Israel, a divide amongst the people, this causes a block in God's blessing. Because it's the opposite of godliness. Godliness is oneness. And therefore, where godliness is, there is harmony and unity. And therefore, since there is a fragmentation and a break in Israel, and divide, and God forbid, even reaching to the point of hatred, and it's interesting, right before this whole literally before October 7th, there was a huge fight on the streets of Tel Aviv pertaining to a partition, a mechitza, which they had prayers that would go on Yom Kippur. They would there's a big square in Tel Aviv where there would be prayer. Now the court issued that putting a mechitza, putting a separation that separates between men and women, which is something that Jews have been always praying with. That's the tradition, and that's required according to halacha. Men and women have to be separated with a partition during prayer. But obviously, it goes against the modernization and whatever you're going to call it. So people say, okay, you're not treating women fairly, and so on and so forth. It's degrading. It's this. It's that. And as a result of that, they challenged it in court, and they won. So they said, if you're doing a prayer on the public street, you can't have a mechitza. So when it came to the highest moment of Yom Kippur, the highest moment of Jewish unity, the moment when we stand in front of God where the deepest point of the soul is exposed, and Jews are supposed to be on the highest level of complete oneness, but of course, oneness according to Torah. When the people put up a mechitza, and I think the mechitza was they used Israeli flags, I'm not sure, something like that, to put a mechitza, and a massive fight broke out at the Ne'ilah. People came who generally wouldn't even come to pray. They came just to make trouble. And they broke the mechitza. They breached the mechitza that was trying the people that came to pray. And it was very, 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 very heartbreaking. It was enormously heartbreaking. So what happens? There is this great tear and this great divide. Now we know that Aaron, the high priest, his unique contribution, he's mostly known for, not for his holiness, not for his goodness, not for his righteousness, but what he's mostly known for is that he was a peacemaker. He brought people together. Ohev shalom verodev shalom. A man who loves peace and pursues peace. And the clouds of glory came because of peace. Why? Because what are the clouds? The clouds are what take all the individual people that each one is doing their own thing and enclose them in one area that they're all considered together. Without the, if people are living and camping out on a quite a far area, there's nothing that, especially if it's an open desert, then they're all separate. But if you put a wall around them, that enclosure unifies everybody to make it one party, to make it one entity. So that's why Aaron, who's the man of peace, unifying all the particles, all the pieces, all the parts of the Jewish people, unifying the people into oneness. That's what, and he did it both on a highly communal level, but he also did it in a very detailed way. Because whenever he found out when two people were not getting along with each other, he would get involved and would say here and there, and he would negotiate a peace. He would negotiate peace between men and women. In other words, when husbands and wives had marital problems, they didn't go to Moshe. For everything else, you went to Moshe. But when you needed to negotiate your marital problems, you came to Aaron. He would sit you down, and you wouldn't leave before you felt really good, and back the marital harmony was restored to the marriage. That was the magic of Aaron. He was the man of peace, and that's the reason why in his merit came those clouds. So sadly, this year, physically, the day after Simchas Torah, day after Sukkot, which we celebrate the peace also in a sukkah. Sukkot is all about peace. Because we take all the four species that we shake on Sukkot represent the four different types of Jews. The more learned, the more pious, the more observant, the less observant. Everybody comes together as one. We feel we're one people. Without judgment, just a unity, just a simple love that encompasses everybody. Everybody dances together in a sukkah. Everybody's unified. So as soon as the Yom Tov of Sukkot is over, and the sukkah is not here anymore, the clouds of glory weren't here anymore, what happened? And we're supposed to actually melt into the highest moment of peace, reflecting the oneness that we achieved on Yom Kippur. But that's a very abstract, otherworldly oneness. Implementing that on Simchat Torah, where the oneness finds a very physical expression and everybody dancing together with the Torah. It's at that moment that the walls were breached and the terrorists came in and wreaked havoc. So Rashi says, the king of Arad, who are these Kanani? The Kanani, Rashi says, was not Kanani. It's Amalek. Yoshef HaNegev, they live to the south. Gaza's on the south. Gaza's on the south. They came from Gaza, from the south, on this day, and they attacked, and they took hostages. That's the only time the Torah says, emphasize they took hostages. It's like the Torah is talking about a story thousands of years ago. The Torah is talking about a story that happened now. Although something of that story happened in the desert, the day right after Aaron passed away and the clouds of glory went away and Amalek attacked, the real story the Torah is talking about is October 7th. It's like the story that happened in biblical times was just a little seed of an event that was going to happen much later, which we saw with our own eyes. If that's the case, this is very important that we breach this breach. Now, when do we fight Amalek? Now, let's connect it to Purim. And Rashi says over there that Amalek is waiting. Amalek, and Rashi adds, in that Rashi, and over there, I mentioned this all in an earlier class. I'm just bringing it together because this is becoming very relevant to us now on Purim. So Rashi mentions over there that Amalek is on standby. Amazing. Rashi says Amalek is on standby. Ritzua Merdas, they're always waiting and Rashi uses the word Ritzua. Ritzua is like strip, like we call the Gaza Strip. They're always ready, waiting on standby to attack. In other words, they're looking spiritually to see when the Jewish people are weak, when there is a breach. They attacked. Now let me tell you about another breach that happened last year. Now I'm not, God forbid, in any way justifying. Chas v'sholem, God forbid, I would never ever say anything that would justify any type of infliction, pain, suffering, but what I am saying is, in order to fix things, we need to therefore know what the issues are, which screws we need to tighten. Not to say what happened is justified, but what we can tighten. And I'm not saying this based on my own, but based on what was said by the greatest of the great. So here there's a little prophecy from the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Said on Purim, Tafshin Lamed, 1970. On Purim 1970, give me a second here. Let me just find it, because I'd like to quote this correctly. Purim 1970, the Rebbe was talking about the concept called that we have to assure that the Jewish people should be a complete and wholesome people. And that the Jewish people should be a pure Jewish people. And to be a Jew, you're either born to a Jewish mother, or if you're not Jewish, there's always a way in. Anybody can become Jewish. There's no rejection of any race, any person. You can be a granddaughter of Eichmann or Joseph Mengele, Yamach Shema, may their names be blotted out. I'll make it even more worse or better. You can be the granddaughter or grandson of Hitler, God forbid. And if you're sincere and you want to convert and you're willing to take on the laws of conversion, to convert as a Jew, you have the right to convert. You have to go through the conversion based in, and you're converted. And when you become a Jew, every Jew is obligated to love you with all their heart. They have even more than loving a regular Jew. Because to love a regular Jew is one mitzvah, meaning a someone who's born Jewish. To love a convert, who's someone who converted, is another mitzvah. To love a Jew and a convert. So it's an extra love and an extra affection. So there's no racism over here. But there is an entity called the Jewish people. And for us to function in this world as a godly people, we are a godly people. We're not doing anybody a favor if we cease to be a godly people. If we cease to be a godly people, there's no reason for the world to exist. The world better appreciate that we're a godly people. The world needs us very much because we are the channel of God to the world. That's the fact. If someone, is happy, that's the reality. That's all over Scripture. That's where the Torah tells us God made his choice at Sinai. It goes back way to the beginning of time. And that's the reality. And Jews need to be Jewish. And Jews can't assimilate. And Jews can't assimilate Gentiles into the Jewish people. Sadly, there is a horrific attempt that began already in the late 1960s and into the 1970s to do away with the procedure of conversion, which means to make up, instead of divine laws of how to convert, to make up human procedures of how to convert, where you don't follow the Shulchan Aruch, which is the code of Jewish law, which tells you X, Y, and Z of how to make a conversion, where people decided that we're rabbis also, we don't follow the Torah, but because we have a different version of Judaism, whether it was Reform or even conservative. But it's not following the law handed down to Moses. So if you're not following the law and other things, it's a problem. And it's between the person and God. And, hopefully we can educate each other and help each other get to a higher level of observance. Of course, we shouldn't make that attempt. But it's not the destruction of the Jewish people. When does it become an absolute destruction, spiritual holocaust of the Jewish people? Is when you change the conversion from what it's meant to be and just allow people to convert based on the whim of a rabbi giving a blessing or I don't know, whatever. Whatever the criteria becomes, that's other than the Shulchan Aruch. So what happens? People are given a certificate that they're Jewish. Then they marry Jewish men and women, but they're not Jewish. And no matter what they do, no matter how much they scream and cry and yell and get upset if anybody calls them not Jewish, it doesn't change the fact. Because to be Jewish means it's a divine thing. It's God's decision. And God told us the rules. Just like you can't, wood is wood and stone is stone. These are certain parameters that make up its existence. The Jew is a different type of entity, which in order to be Jewish, this is how you can be Jewish. And if you don't have this, then you're not Jewish. That's it. Now, God forbid if you take down the wall that separates between the Jewish people and the non-Jewish people, you breach that wall and you start mixing it together, then there's no more Jewish identity in this world. Because people who think they're marrying Jews are not marrying Jews, and their children are not Jewish, and suddenly the Jewish people are a mix of Jew and Gentile. And what is that? That doesn't help the Gentile and it doesn't help the Jew. It doesn't help anybody. It's the most destructive thing in the world. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe was crying his soul out, begging. Now, the Reform rabbis and conservative rabbis in America that were accepting people were doing it. What can you do? You stop them. How do you stop them? It's a free country. We're giving certificates. The good thing was that Israel, however, did not recognize those conversions. The state of Israel did not recognize those conversions. And therefore, people who wanted to be recognized in the state of Israel as Jewish, because as Jewish, every single Jew has a right to become a citizen in the state of Israel, because it was established as a Jewish state. So people, even though they would maybe have been lenient because they were ignorant and didn't learn and so on and so forth, thought that Rabbi so-and-so who is not following halacha, not following Jewish law, can give them a certification of Jewishness. But when they applied and wanted to, go make aliyah or whatever, and they were told that this rabbinic certificate of conversion is not valid. It's not recognized in Israel. It has to be through only those courts that have the authority. And in Israel, there is something called the Rabbanut. The Rabbanut is the rabbinic establishment of the state of Israel, which officially follows halacha. It's not conservative, and it's not reform. It's not any other denomination of Judaism. It is Torah law. And therefore, this is the way it was until the beginning of the literally the end of the 1960s, the beginning of the 1970s. In the early 1970s is when people in Israel wanted to start tinkering with that law and change the definition of who is a Jew. And that it doesn't have to be, it said you need to convert, but they wanted to take one word out of it. A conversion according to halacha, which means to be converted according to Jewish law. And there was a huge fights going on in the Knesset regarding that law. Huge fighting. Because it would, and the Rebbe was then very, very, very much, probably at that moment, a lot of religious Jews in Israel didn't see it so much as a threat. Even the religious. Why? Because the problem with conservative, with the Reform Gerus was very little. It wasn't that much. And they didn't really see it as would be too much of a problem. So they weren't putting up the fight. And the Rebbe was crying his soul out, how that's going to destroy literally the very fabric of the Jewish people. And the Rebbe was crying that if certain people, if the Rebbe demanded that all these people leave the government, that whoever cares about Torah and Mitzvot has to leave the government, has to threaten that we're going to topple the government on this law. Because, to have a government, you need to have a certain amount of people in the government. This is worthy of toppling the government. And the Rebbe felt that if people are staying in the government because the government is promising to support the yeshivas, see, a lot of times that's called bribery. You're getting money from the government that's giving you a lot of money for your yeshiva, and you're arguing that because of that your young boys can study Torah. But the Rebbe said, on what are you doing it? You're going to have your boys learning Torah with money that is being given as bribery money, as hush money, that you're allowing such a law to pass the Israeli government, which will take the word out of who is a Jew. The Rebbe got enormous flack in America from so many of the non-observant Jews. They were very angry. They felt the Rebbe is mixing into Israeli politics, and that he is being whatever, irrational on it, and so on and so forth. And even Chabad rabbis were afraid that they would stop getting funding from many places that they're being funded. And the Rebbe felt that no matter what, even if he loses everything, even if every Chabad house has to shut down because of it, this is something you fight for to the very end. Because we're dealing with the very existence of the Jewish people. Now, I do want to say to you that this past year, in 2023, the Supreme Court in Israel officially handed down a law that Israel is obligated to accept the conversions. You see, till now it was putting in the extra word, but they're obligated to accept the conversions from which are not according to halakha. We know that the Israeli Supreme Court is very, very secular and very, very anti-religious. And this past year, they handed down such a law. Now, let me tell you the words which are literally goosebumps you get when you hear. So this were the words the Rebbe said on Purim, 1970. He said in Yiddish, Herzich ein, he cried out, listen, a time will come, there will come such a horrible trouble, there will come such a horrific event, such a terrible tzara, that people will not be able to sleep at night. There will come a trouble that people will not be able to sleep at night. And then we're going to try to look for the reason of what allowed this to happen. What's going to be the trouble? That non-Jews have such control over Israel. In other words, Israel is supposed to be a protected country. There will come a time when there will be a non-Jewish breach of the terrorists into Israel, where people will be shocked. How in the world did they get in? How in the world were they able to have such... Now again, the Rebbe doesn't say terrorists. He just says non-Jews have so much control in Israel. And therefore you should know, he says, the reason is, since they breached the wall, the spiritual wall that separates spiritually between the Jew and the non-Jew, that wall was breached. Therefore, this causes that the physical breach down here that separates between the enemies of Israel and the Jewish people was also taken down. If you break the border spiritually, you will break the border physically. In other words, Israel is a Jewish homeland. And if you'd stop defining what Jew is according to Torah, so you're mixing Jew and non-Jew in the spiritual realms, so you'll bring in the non-Jew, who is, in this case, the evil non-Jew, who wants to kill men, women, and children through whichever way they'll come in, tunnels and who knows what. And right through the wall, right through the mechitza, breach the wall. So therefore the Rebbe concluded, he said, I'm giving you a very good advice. I'll give you a very good advice. Why do we have to, God forbid, arrive to that terrible moment and then not be able to sleep? Then you won't be able to sleep nights. Stay awake now, the Rebbe said. Stay awake now for a couple of nights in the Knesset. Don't go to sleep. Sit there and make and fix this breach now. That it should be certified in cement, if you might say, in the Israeli law, that there is no way this is even negotiable. The only conversion that is kosher is an absolute conversion according to Torah. You know how many during the Ukrainian-Russian war, you know how many Ukrainians that are not Jewish came up to Israel as Jews? When millions of Jews left Russia, you know how many Russians that are not Jewish came into Israel? All of this is not good. It's not good for the spiritual health of Israel, of the spiritual health of the Jewish people. So we're talking about breaches. So there is a breach in the unity, and there is a breach that's a breach between Jews itself. And then there is a taking away of the wall that exists between Jew and non-Jew, which needs to be there, both for the benefit of the non-Jewish world and for the Jewish world. It's interesting how both those walls were broken this year. There was a horrific fall in the unity of Israel, and there was a removal of that barrier. So, but Purim, here's the good news. That's painful. What I said till now is painful. But now let's fix it. So one of the things about Purim, and this I also spoke about a few years ago, but now it's going to become extra beautiful and extra special. One of the things about Purim is that Purim, all the mitzvot of Purim, a lot of the entities related to Purim are associated with the letter Mem. First of all, the great hero of Purim, besides the heroine, the great hero of Purim, Mordechai, his name begins with a Mem. The mitzvot of Purim, Purim has a lot of commandments that we do. The mitzvot of Purim start with a Mem. The first big mitzvah of Purim is to read the Megillah. The reading of the Megillah is called the Mikra Megillah, the reading of the Megillah. The second mitzvah is called sending food baskets or presents of food to friends. It's called Mishloach Manos. So these both words, Mishloach and Manos, both start with a Mem. Mem. There's another mitzvah on Purim called Matanos Le'evyonim, which means gifts to the poor. Now usually you would say tzedakah la'aniyim. You give tzedakah, charity, to the poor. But on Purim we don't call it that way. On Purim it's called matanos le'evyonim. So the first word starts, aniyim would also be with an M in the end, but matanos le'evyonim starts with a mem and ends with a mem, the second word. So mishloach manos, both words start with a mem. Mikra Megillah, both words start with a mem. Matanas le'evyonim, and the next one is Mishta v'simcha. You have to make a Purim drinking party. Mishta starts with a mem. So pretty a lot of mems floating around the Purim. What's the mystery of Purim having so many mems? And the answer to that is, mem is very much connected with the closing of the breached walls. So if any Purim itself ends with a mem. Mem is a letter that has two versions to it. There is an open mem and there is a closed mem. There's a few letters in the alphabet that are doubles. Mem is one of them, but in a mem, the difference between the two letters is whether the letter is open or closed. There is what's called in the sages referred to it as mem psucha, an open mem, and mem stuma, a closed mem. Now, when you say the word mem, just saying the letter mem, you already hear the two mems in the mem. Mem. So you start with a ma and you end with a ma. The difference between the two mems in the word mem is that one mem is open and the other mem is closed. So when do you use an open mem? They have the same pronunciation. There's no difference in the pronunciation. It's just in the writing of the letters. The open mem, which I don't have a picture of right now, you can look it up, it's got a little opening in the bottom left floor of the mem, a little crack. And anybody can come inside. The closed mem is completely closed like a box. It's locked. It's a closed circuit. It's not hackable. The open mem is vulnerable to be hacked. It's unlocked. It's an unlocked door. Not only is it an unlocked door, there is a space to get in. Now the sages tell us, and the Kabbalists make a really big deal about this, that these two mems, the open mem and the closed mem, are actually symbolic for the exile and the redemption. The exile is an era and a time when we are in the state of the open mem. The open mem is the God's conduct with us is in a manner of an open mem. And during the time of the redemption, the energy of the world is in a closed mem. Or the energy of Israel, the Jewish people. Now, what does that mean? The open mem is a mem that invites trouble. It's inviting exile. And the closed mem is one that is fixing it. So the general rule is that the open mem is whenever the mem is in a word, either the beginning of a word or the middle of the word. Or any letter of a word that has a mem, the mem you use is always an open mem. Unless there's one exception. If it's at the end of the word. If it's the last letter of a word, then you use the closed mem. And that probably indicates that the word is closed next. No other letter coming afterward. So it's a closed mem. Again, whenever the mem is in the end of a word. For instance, the name Menachem, right? One of the names of Mashiach, which is Menachem. There's two mems in it. The first letter mem in the beginning of the word is an open mem, but the last letter Menachem, the mem at the end, is a closed mem. Now there is an exception. In the book of Nehemiah, it says that Nehemiah was after the story of Purim. After the story of Purim. Nehemiah was one of those coming up to help rebuild the second temple. So it says when he came up back from the exile of the Babylonian exile and the Persian exile, he's going through the destruction, he's walking through the ghost town of Jerusalem. And he's what's it called again? Scanning. He's evaluating what's going on. How are they going to rebuild it? How are they going to fix it? So there's a verse over there that describes that there is Chaymas. There are the walls of the city of Jerusalem. Chaymas Yerushalayim, the walls of Jerusalem. Asher heima prutzim, that they are breached. So the word prutzim, I think that's the word, somewhere in Nehemiah, I can look it up. Actually, let me find which word. It's Nehemiah Beis Pasuk Yud Gimel. So it's not the word perutzim. It's Chaymas Yerushalayim, the walls of Jerusalem, Asher Heim perutzim. Now the word Heim is two letters, Hey and Mem. Since the Mem is the last letter of the word Heim, it should have been a locked and closed Mem. But what kind of Mem is it? It's the only time in the Torah where you have a Mem in the end of a word and it's open. Why? Because it's talking about the broken walls of Jerusalem. Jerusalem also had walls. to keep the sacred city as a sacred city. The exile is that the sacred city, is broken into. And the holiness was contaminated. And all forces of darkness are able to plug into the holy site of Jerusalem to receive energy. What do you think the Muslims so badly don't want to let go of that holy site? We know that one of the things they said that they attacked because Israel was vulnerable because they didn't get along with each other. But they also said they attacked because they feel there's a threat to Al-Aqsa. The Beis Hamikdash, they know that very soon our temple is going up there. And the mosque is getting out of there. But why do they want it so much? Why do the Christians also want, to have their churches and their things in Jerusalem? Everybody wants a piece of Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem is a place where heaven and earth kiss. Jerusalem is the place, the headquarters of life and energy and wealth. All blessing. That's the point of contact with God and the world. Everybody wants a piece of that. But that can only happen when the walls are breached. That's why there are walls there, to protect it. When holiness is rebuilt, yes, of course, Jerusalem is going to be the massive distribution center for blessings for the entire world. Everybody's going to come pray in Jerusalem. It's not going to be like Mecca, where you have to be Muslim to walk into Mecca. I think that's the rule. I don't think if you're a infidel, if you're a non-believer, Muslim believer, you can walk into the holiest site. But the holy temple, what does the verse say? Ki beisi beis tefillah. My house is a house of prayer. L'chola yikare. It's going to be called l'chola amim, to all the nations. All of mankind is going to be called to the holy temple, and everybody can pray. However, it's a Jewish temple. It's a temple. It's not going to be a temple, a mosque, and a church. It's going to be only a temple. And from Jerusalem will come, and in order to keep the structure according to the way God wants that structure, there was a wall there. Since the wall was breached, everything physical is a indication of something spiritual. The breaching happened in the letter mem. So the closed mem in the letter of the word haim is supposed to be closed, but it got unlocked. It opened up. Someone broke into it. The forces of evil, of darkness broke into it. And that's why it is open. But it says when the Geula will come, when Mashiach will come, the broken mem. Now let's understand that this is not just one little verse. This is an indication of a cosmic breach. The entire spiritual order and system is breached open. And that's the time of exile. When forces of darkness are utilizing the flow of energy and becoming empowered with that godly force and using it in an unholy way. When Mashiach will come, it won't be that way. Whoever will be wanting to live a moral, ethical, godly life will be receiving with abundance. But you cannot live disconnected. It won't be possible in the days of Mashiach. Why? Because the mem will be closed. The blessings will not flow to anybody who wants. You have to follow the rules. And again, this is not people deciding. God is deciding that. Because the flow is going to come through unbroken pipes. Exile is considered broken pipes. The pipes will all be repaired and everything will be closed. So there is a verse, a contrary verse. This is a verse in Isaiah, in chapter 9, verse number 6, where it says over there, Lamar Bahamisra. It speaks about the reinstitution of the Davidic kingdom. So it says, Lamar Bahamisra, the government of King David, of Mashiach, is going to be a very, very, very great government because it's going to extend to govern the entire world. U'l'shalom ein kates, and there's going to be infinite peace in the world. No more conflict. Under Mashiach, there won't be any conflict. All differences and all conflicts will be resolved under the amazing wisdom and kindness of Mashiach that will have the knowledge and to be able to right all wrongs and to unify all of humanity. So the word Lamar B'Hamisra, which is referring to the governorship of Mashiach that will increase, his power will increase over the whole world. The word Lamarbe, which means to increase, the word Lamarbe has a mem in the second letter of the word. It should have been an open mem. But if you look in Isaiah, it's the only mem that's in the middle of a word that's closed. Because that's indicating on the Mashiach's kingdom is going to close the circuit. And once Mashiach is reinstated, once the king of David is reinstated, no more, it will never ever be broken. So the whole process of Geula is a process of closing the open wall. So what does it have to do with Purim? Purim is a time for making that close, for locking that door. And we lock that door through all the commandments of Purim. That's why the Purim Mitzvot are all with mems, because they're doing a major tikkun on the mems. Mordechai with a mem. Haman has a mem in the middle of his name. He's the open mem, Haman. And the mem is right in the middle of his name. Mordechai is also an open mem. But the work of Mordechai is to fix the blemish and that's why we have all these mems in the mitzvahs. But why is Purim the day of fixing the mem? The answer is that the only way we can close and lock, and that the unholy should never, ever, ever be able to breach the walls of holiness, to break in, is something that requires the human, our participation. What we mean is like this. When God created the world in a perfect state. God's creation was absolutely perfect, magnificent, but with only one problem. It was vulnerable for it to be broken into. What's the proof? Proof is in the pudding. That's what happened. If God would have created the world completely safe, that the klipa should never be able to break into it, then it would never be broken into. God created the world in the beginning, it was so perfect, but he left one door open. That's why it says, the sages say, that God said, I created the world, I closed the world from three directions, from three sides. God created the world with the letter Hey. He closed the world from three sides. But one side he left open. It says, the Midrash says, that God left the northern side open. There is an opening in the north. Our job, and that's from that opening what happens. And what does that mean, the opening? God left the human. When God created Adam and Eve, he created them with a consciousness of God, a very powerful consciousness, but with the tiny little bit of a possibility for them to be seduced into the snake. And that possibility is what caused man to fall. What that teaches us is that everything that's coming from God is never completely safe. Why? Because that final security to build the wall and to secure the creation, God wants us to do that. Only when what does that mean? Let me just explain very quickly. When Mashiach will come, and we are going to come back to that level where Adam and Eve were before the sin, we will be on that level, but we will be much greater than Adam and Eve before the sin. because we will be unseducible. We will be unsinnable. By us, it won't be possible anymore. Why? Because we worked it through. Because we came to an understanding that we want to live our lives a godly life and a holy life. It wasn't superimposed upon us. When your child is behaving because you're superimposing it upon them, you never know if that's going to last. Because as long as they're under your influence, yes. But you go out of town and you're supposed to come home after a week, but instead you came home only after 3 months, you might find that the well-behaved child, because it's coming from the parent, it's not coming from the child. Ultimately, you have to let your child mess up, get into big trouble, and suffer and go through until they learn the lesson. And then when they finally can put their life together, and God is willing to wait 5,000 years for that, until we figure it out. But when we figure it out, it's foolproof. It's not breakable anymore. And that's the same thing with the Torah. When God gave us the Torah at Sinai, because it was Him giving it, and even when we accepted the Torah at Sinai, it was because God was influencing us to accept it, either because of force, or more so, He forced us with His love. He showed us so much love it was impossible to say no, and we accepted the Torah. Since it wasn't really coming from within our own selves, it left the northern side open. The north is referring to the evil inclination. The Yetzer Hara is sometimes called Hatzfoni. He comes from the north. So you can always come in and break it. But that's the miracle of Purim. Sages tell us that Purim was the completion of the receiving of the Torah. It took us 1,000 years to really accept the Torah. Because on Purim, when we accepted the Torah, it was not from anything external. We accepted it because we realized we really, truly, from the deepest place, it was a time of extreme darkness. It was a time where God was not influencing. On the other hand, it seemed like God abandoned us. We were left very, very neglected, very, very crushed, very, very vulnerable, in a very difficult place. And the Jewish people unified in the deepest unity and chose to commit themselves to God wholeheartedly. A commitment that's coming from us, because of us, from within us, is far more durable and will not be breached. It is for that reason that Purim is the rectification. The whole energy of Purim is a rectification on breached walls. Because this inherent possibility for the unholy to get in from that open mem is when God builds Jerusalem, Jerusalem can be broken into. But when we build Jerusalem, and from thousands of years of exile, and then we come back and build Jerusalem, of course with God's help. We can't do anything without God's help. But when we're participating and it's coming from us, it's our Jerusalem. It's our structure. And then it doesn't break. And then it's not breached. That's the closing of the wall. And that's the reason why in Purim you have all the mems, because through our mitzvahs of Purim we breach the breaches. Now let's see the literal sense of how we breach. So this is really, really fits very well what we're talking about, that this Purim we should fix the breach that happened sadly this time in the south of Israel. But we know in the north of Israel is Hezbollah, which actually is a much bigger threat even than Hamas that's on the south. And they're in the north, and they're still lobbing missiles, and they're a huge danger. And what we read just a little while ago, their tunnel system, God forbid, is way more sophisticated and way larger than the Hamas tunnel system. People think like what can be even more tunnels than that? It's extremely, extremely frightening. And yet we know that God's got us covered. But we got to breach the north. We got to close the breach on the north. So how are we going to do it? Purim is the answer, but more particular. So here we go. We'll summarize the fixing of the breach. We're going to do it simply by doing all the mitzvot of Purim, but we're going to have special intention when we do these mitzvahs. And primarily, we're going to focus on two of the mitzvahs of Purim, which are Mishloach Manos, which are giving gifts to each other, and Matanos Lavyonim. Let's first go through the halachic criteria. Mishloach Manos means you have to give to one friend, to one fellow, to one other person, a gift consisting of two food items. It must be food, can't give money, can't give flowers. It must be food. The custom is that it should be of two blessings. So you can give a fruit and a water bottle, and you're good. Or another drink. As long as it's two different blessings. Fruit is one thing, you can give a cookie and a candy, and you're good. It's a very easy mitzvah to do. To one person. You have to give one gift to one person. But when I say one gift, the one gift has to consist of manos, two items. The other mitzvah of Purim is to give money to the poor. For that, you need to give to two poor people. During the day of Purim, you have to find, it has to be during the daytime. You can't do this during the nighttime. You can give tzedakah other times during the night. But the mitzvah of Purim is during Purim day. This would be this coming Sunday. During the day, you have to give two gifts, and this is money now, and you're giving this to poor people. Now, I think you can fulfill this mitzvah actually of giving them also food, but you're giving it as tzedakah. You're not as to a poor person, not to meaning not you're not giving it to give to a friend, but you're giving it to particularly a poor person. But the custom is to give money. It has to be two poor people, each one gift. So it says the best is to give them enough that they can have a meal from it. Right? So if you give two people a couple of dollars, $5, and another person $5, with $10 you do your mitzvah. So these are the mitzvahs. Now why are they so important, and especially this Purim? So let's go back to the story of Purim itself and say that the story of Purim was rooted in the same story that we spoke earlier on October 7th. There was a discord amongst Israel, amongst the Jewish people. Jewish people were not so unified. We were not so tight-knit. And you know who picked up on it? Amalek. Amalek has got an incredible nose. He can smell a rat, like sometimes you have birds who can spot a tiny little mouse from a few thousand feet away. These predatory birds, and they zoom in, pounce on it. Amalek has got an incredible nose. He can sniff immediately when something is ajar in the spirituality of the Jewish people. So it says when Haman is talking to Achashverosh and getting Achashverosh to consent to massacre all of the Jewish people, to sign off on the decree of a Holocaust, of a final solution. You see the final solution? They keep on trying, right? We shouldn't. Hitler thought he'll do the final solution. Haman also thought he'll do the final solution. They've tried again and again, but we know it's never going to happen. But we don't want it to be any more tested. We had enough already. I think we've shown already the world it's never going to happen, and it's enough, and God has shown that as well, and we can be done with it. But this was one of the biggest attempts ever for a final solution, to get rid of the Jew problem. And what happened? So it says that he talks to Achashverosh, and he says, well, there's a people, they're scattered amongst your all the lands, all the provinces. They have very strange customs, and to the king, it's not worth it to let them live. Therefore, I'm going to give you a whole lot of money, and you'll just release them into my charge, and I'm just going to take care already that these people that are a nuisance to the kingdom will be eliminated. Achashverosh very much concedes. That's the story of Purim, the beginning of the story, of the decree. What's the But we know there is an inside story. And the sages tell us that every time it says the king in the Megillah, although God's name is not mentioned in the Megillah even once, but whenever it mentions the king, it's referring to Hashem. It's referring to God. So when Haman is speaking to Achashverosh, the Talmud says he was slandering to the king above. Haman down here, the physical Haman, is speaking to King Achashverosh. The spiritual Haman in heaven, the source of evil, in heaven, he is speaking to God in heaven with all kinds of accusations against the Jewish people. And what does he say? Yashno am echad. There is a people that are supposed to be one. Am echad. They are the people of oneness. Why are they one? Because they're your people. You are one. You are the essence of oneness. They are your people, so they're supposed to be one because they are unified with you. And your oneness expresses itself in them. How does the oneness of God express itself in the Jewish people? The oneness of God expresses itself in the Jewish people is that the Jewish people are so attached to each other. They care so much about each other. They love each other to pieces. They can never, ever, ever bear the pain of another Jew. We take care of each other really, really well. It's one of the reasons where there's so much envy on the Jewish people. We really look out of each other in business and finances and every element. Jews really care for each other because we're really one person. We feel like we're one person. You hurt one Jew on the other side of the world and every Jew is aching. Every Jew is sobbing. The pain is felt. It's raw. We are one person. It doesn't make a difference what we look like on the outside. More religious, less religious, more. You saw on October 7th what it did. It rattled the Jewish people across the board, at least in the beginning. We're one people. However, Haman says they're a nation of one, but now they're not so one. Mefuzar and Mefaira, they're scattered. They're fighting. They're not getting along with each other. Each one rejects the other, and so on and so forth. And that was his accusation. There is a breach in the oneness. And that, sadly, there was a lot of fighting going on. There was a lot of discord in the Jewish communities, and that's what allowed for this horrific decree to come about. Similar to what caused the Second Temple's destruction, because there was baseless hatred. People were, wherever you went, to every synagogue, to every community, there were those who didn't walk into the other synagogue, those who didn't want to speak to the others. People were not getting along. People were very, 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 very into their own, and there was a lack of harmony and unity, which was terrible. And Haman picked up on that, and he slandered the Jewish people, and that's what brought to the decree. So in order to repair it, and when Mordechai reveals the terrible news to Esther, because Mordechai knew what's going on, and he ran out into the city, and he was crying, and he was making a commotion. As it says, he dressed himself in sackclothing, and he cried, and he was a big minister, and Esther, his niece, found out about it. She sent one of her agents to check in with Mordechai, what's going on, and he told her what's going on. She didn't know about it. That the Jewish people were sold to be massacred and slaughtered. So Esther says so Mordechai back and forth, Mordechai is asking Esther to go and plead by her husband on behalf of her people. Her husband didn't know she was Jewish. That was one of the things that Mordechai told her when Achashverosh married her. He took her as a contestant. Mordechai warned her not to tell her of her nationality. She didn't. So until now it was unknown. So now Mordechai is saying, go to your husband, go to the king, and plead for your people. So Esther says, I will do it, although it's very dangerous, because the king can kill his wife very quickly, like he did the previous wife. And he was in a very grumpy mood, because it was after an assassination attempt. He wasn't just grumpy, he was paranoid. So when she comes and she does whatever, the king was very scared. So she knew she's risking her life. But she said, I'll do it on the condition, but I want you to do something first. Go gather all the Jewish people and fast for me 3 days. She says, Lech kenosis kol Yehudim. Go gather the Jewish people. It wasn't just gather them and inform them of the news. The gathering wasn't just, okay, so how are you going to speak to all of them and tell them what's going on? So you have to gather them all, the ones who live in Shushan. She was really telling him, I know the problem. The problem is, the reason this can happen spiritually is because there's a lack of unity. Go gather all the people together and unify them. bring them together to become one people. And that's what Mordechai did. He gathered the Jewish people. And finally, there was an amazing sense of brotherhood and love across the Jewish people. Everybody realized they're equally Jewish. Everybody realized the anti-Semite doesn't care what color yarmulke you wear, what kind of hat you wear. Doesn't care which shtibel you daven, which nusach you daven, if you're doing nusach Ashkenaz, nusach Sfard. If you're praying or if you're not praying. If you eat gebrachs on Pesach or if you don't eat gebrachs. Doesn't care. To him, you're equally Jewish. Even if you pretend not to be Jewish, the anti-Semite knows exactly who's Jewish. And is going to rout you out even if you're just a tiny bit of Jew inside of you. And Jews knew that and felt that. At that moment, they felt it very strong. And they melted into oneness. For a moment, they realized they have no one but each other. And they became literally one. And that's what saved the day. Because the moment we're one, there is no more decree. The decree can only come when we're splintered, not when we're one. What happened after October 7th? Amazing, sweeping oneness came across Israel. Problem is that God sometimes waits too long. Why didn't he jump on it? It was so beautiful at that time. Now he's, But overall, Israel is still united. The Jewish people are very united now. And there is still a strong sense of oneness. There's a lot of forces that are trying to break us. But the oneness is there. And our work needs to be is to keep that oneness going. Because after a while, everybody's got opinions and ideas, and that's when we start fragmenting again, God forbid. We need to remember that we are one. So therefore, after the decree was nullified and the big miracle of Purim happened, what was instituted as the way we celebrate Purim? There's a few different mitzvot that we do, but amongst them are two of the mitzvot are all about creating a sense of absolute oneness. One of them is the Mishloach Manos mitzvah, sharing our meals, giving gifts to each other. So, everybody has to find a friend. Every other mitzvah of Purim you can do yourself besides these two mitzvahs. The Megillah you can read yourself. You got better read it with a minyan, but even that, okay, because you need a minyan, but it's not like you can be in shul and you can come alone not to talk to anybody. You can be in isolation. The mitzvah is not about the many. It's not about coming together. Mishloach manos, if you're angry at the whole world and you're fighting with everybody, you better find the person you're in the least fighting with and go across the street and pass on. You have to find somebody to connect to. You have to give a gift to somebody. That's the point. Make a connection. The mitzvah is to make a connection. However, the Mishloach manos connection is great. It emphasizes unity, but not the ultimate unity, because who are you giving Mishloach manos to? Ish l're'eyu, a person to their friend. So, very rare to find someone who doesn't get along with anybody. Everybody's got, some people of their club. But you can do it. You can give to someone who's of your type. Someone who you get along with anyways. Their friend, you're sharing with your friend. So the bigger mitzvah is matanas lavyonim, gift to the poor. And over here we have to understand, when it says poor, it doesn't mean, there's the physical meaning. He's a person who literally is poor. And by the way, evyon doesn't only mean poor. Evyon means destitute. That means super needy. Poor means needy, and destitute means super needy. Someone who doesn't have anything. That's why it says that people who have, to really fulfill your mitzvah, you have to give someone who really doesn't have what to eat, kind of. So it's the mitzvah to look for those. Thank God in our Jewish communities we have organizations that look out for the people who don't have what to eat. So when you give to these organizations, usually in every community there's a Tomchei Shabbos, people who actually feed people. So you're doing your mitzvah by giving to the organization, and they're giving out to these people. This is important to know that. But that has a spiritual meaning as well. When you say someone is poor, it doesn't only mean poor in in wealth, in material, it also can mean poor spiritually. Matanas Levionim means connect and attach yourself and give and share with people that you might, and maybe you're right, are of an inferior level in your observance, in your level of commitment. And maybe someone who is destitute, which means he or she has absolutely nothing. They're so far off in their spiritual development. Nothing ever. Reach out, grab that person, connect. Make the connection to another Jew, Jewish man, Jewish woman. Don't make any differentiations at all. Of course, differentiation is that they have to be Jewish. Yes, that's the differentiation. And have to be halachically Jewish. That wall we can't break, because that's not Jewish. The mitzvah is to unify the Jewish people. It has to be the Jewish people. But within the Jewish people, don't connect only to those who are of the same political affiliation like you. Same shul, same ideology, same philosophy. Find people who are very, very, very much the opposite of you. And very much, and it's even more than that, it's interesting. We mentioned earlier, we don't say tzedakah, which is usually the way we give charity, but we say matana, we say gift. Because when you give the gifts to the poor, it's different on Purim. Here it counts the attitude. Charity means very much that you're doing the other person a favor. Charity. I've got, you don't have, I'm giving you. Gifts is an expression of friendship. A gift you give to somebody who you know you're getting from them as well. That's why the sages say that a person wouldn't give a gift to someone unless the person gave them some kind of satisfaction. Who do you give a gift to? Think about it. You help me out. I'll use the example. Shalach manis, people give. I have to give this person. Because they were so nice to me last week. My mother was ill. They came to visit my mother. The neighbor looked out after her. I have to give the neighbor. They've been taking care of my mom. Taking care of my this. I have to. My is a good teacher. My child is a good teacher. I'm going to give them a nice shalach manis because they took care of my kid in school. So, that teacher was a problem. I don't know if I'm giving the shalach manis. We have all the calculations of who you're giving shalach manis to, right? That's by shalach manis. But the concept of matana really means that. You give a gift to people that you feel you're benefiting from them. That's why you give them a gift. So, but on Purim, you have to feel you're benefiting from every person. Those that are the farthest from you, they're giving you, and that's why you're giving them the gift. So when you're giving to the poor, whether you're giving physically to the poor, or whether you're fulfilling the mitzvah of giving to the poor, even let's say you're sharing a thought or inspiring or inviting someone over to the meal, and they're so far off and you're feeling that you're doing them the favor, they're doing you the biggest favor by giving you the opportunity to do the mitzvah. So you feel like you're giving a gift, don't feel like you're giving charity. No charity on Purim. Gifts. Gifts of connection. This is the mitzvah that solidifies the unity of the Jewish people. It bridges it repairs the breaches. It repairs the tears that there are. Precisely these mitzvahs. And so here the Rebbe spoke very strongly that and the Rebbe says something very interesting. From all the mitzvahs of Purim, it's the easiest mitzvahs. Listening to the Megillah, you have to go to shul, you have to have a kosher Megillah, and you have to have someone who knows how to read the Megillah. Okay, a huge community, usually there's a lot of people who can do that, but it still is it's a whole to-do. Making a Purim party requires work. To make a Purim party, and especially since the Purim party is supposed to be mishta v'simcha, you got to be happy. So becoming happy requires a little effort to be happy. Usually it takes a little mental focus to be happy. What does it take to give a gift? Grab the first two items you see in your house. It can be one cookie and a tangerine. It's nothing. And give it to one person. It's the easiest mitzvah. It's literally a mitzvah like nothing. It's like everybody can do it anytime. And the other one is to give a little what would regular be called charity to two people. Give to the poor is always, it's not a hard mitzvah. It's a very, very, very accessible mitzvah. Why is it so accessible? And the Rebbe says something so beautiful. He says the reason it's so accessible and so easy to do those two mitzvahs is because just like when it comes to our physical needs, the more essential the physical need, the more available it is. For example, what are our primary physical needs? We need shelter, we need clothing, we need food, and we need oxygen. We need to breathe, we need to eat, we need to wear something so we don't freeze, God forbid, and we need shelter. What is from all these things, what is it possible to live a little bit without, mostly without? Shelter. Sadly, there's a lot of people homeless. They live on the street. It's not comfortable, but they're still living. To be naked on the street, that's a very big problem. Clothing is a little more important. That's the next, is more vital than a house, than housing. And then food is even more vital than clothing. Without food or drink, you can't survive too long. And more important than all of that, more essential is oxygen. Right? A couple of minutes without oxygen, finished. So you see that what does God do? Oxygen is at no cost. It's free. Even California didn't come up yet with the idea of taxing every time you breathe. Soon they're going to think of it. But so far it hasn't been already. That's for breathing, you don't have to pay it. Okay, so oxygen is for free and it's available as much as anybody wants all the time. Food and water is pretty available and it's cheaper than clothing. Clothing already takes more. It's harder to get clothing than to get food. Food is cheaper than clothing. And then finally, a home is the most expensive. Rent or your own home, this already costs much more money. Why? Because the level of necessity, the least necessity, the more necessity it is, the easier God, the more available God provided it for us with His infinite wisdom. With the same as with mitzvahs. The mitzvahs that are so crucial for us as Jews, God made them so easy and so available. So on Purim itself, the mitzvahs that are like so important for Purim, because it's at the essence of Purim, Mishloach Manos and Matanos is the easiest mitzvahs. And anybody can do it. And yet the Rebbe says, for whatever reason, people, even though homes give Shalach Manos, and homes give, and a house, that father of the house, the man of the, gives to the poor, it's a mitzvah on every person in the house. But most people forget to teach their children. The children have to give tzedakah. Every child has to give, because you have to educate your children. And definitely every single person in the home should find and give from their own money, if they have money, or you give them $1, a couple of dollars, to give to the poor. And to give Shalach Manos, every single member of the family should give Shalach Manos. It's not like you do it one per house, every person. And the woman has to do it and the man has to do it. It's not like you do it, for the house. Our home is sending Shalach Manos. A husband has to send Shalach Manos. The wife has to send Shalach Manos. And there he says there's tremendous neglect. It's interesting. The Rebbe picked up on that people don't educate and people forget about it. We're so busy with this, and it gets like slid under the carpet, under the rug. This year, let's be very careful with these mitzvahs, and let's have in mind that I can't give Shalach Manos to everybody, and I can't give Matanos Lavyonim to everybody. But when I'm doing these mitzvahs, I am becoming one with every single Jew across the whole world. We're unified. There's no differences. We're in absolute oneness. We're in a state of kenos, one. And in that oneness, we will take the open mem, and we will shut that mem, and we will have a closed mem. And that will bring us to Mashiach, whose name is Menachem, whose name also starts with an open mem and ends with a closed mem, which means there's this power of Purim, power of Mashiach, the holiday, especially this year when we need the Purim to close the breach, massive breach that's in the world. It must be closed. It must be shut. All the way on the north. The northern side has to be closed. maybe a little too early to say this, but since a very close family member of mine is going to close the most northern part of the world for godliness, and I'll elaborate after it's official. So I'm very excited about that, especially since he's actually flying right now to close that deal on a spiritual level. It's gewalt. So that to be shared. So I feel very deeply connected to that shutting and closing of the north on all levels. May we see the geula and the redemption today.